Let us now see some more details of submodule 3.2, the global framework for action on groundwater governance. We start by recalling the conclusions of the global diagnostic, which say that almost everywhere in the world, groundwater governance deficiencies have been identified. Good groundwater governance constitutes the basis for effective groundwater management, and the diagnostic identified pathways for improved groundwater governance, as well as priorities or requirements for effective groundwater governance. Then the next steps were the global vision and the framework for action. The global vision was the desired state of groundwater governance globally by the year 2030, whereas the global framework for action provided guidelines for action to achieve the vision or the goal. And in order to be put into practice, the global vision and framework for action had to be adapted to local conditions. The global vision stated that countries have taken appropriate and effective action to govern their groundwater in order to reach the goals of social development and perennisation of their groundwater and their dependent ecosystems. And the effective governance provisions combined with the guiding principles provided the requirement for good governance, groundwater governance. And these effective provisions, these requirements included an accurate and widely shared understanding of groundwater systems, an effective legal system in which groundwater is put under the control of the public sector, leadership for the resource, for groundwater resources with empowered agencies having appropriate authority, personnel and finance for their tasks, mechanism to facilitate and nurture stakeholder participation, co-management of groundwater and surface water, and the co-management of groundwater land use, and coordination with related sectors to address risks and threats to groundwater. And finally, structured programs for the elaboration and the implementation of priority management actions based on evidence and science. We also saw that the framework for action was action-oriented, and that it sets out a structure for action and specific steps on 5 themes that can be taken by stakeholders. Initial steps to establish an adequate basis for groundwater governance, the strengthening of institutions in groundwater governance, the creation of linkages with main interrelated areas of human activity and policy, and finally, the establishment of a process of groundwater planning and management. The FFA is also a call for action by various actors inside and outside the groundwater community, not only national government and agencies. It sets out the overarching structure for action together with the initial steps and achievable objectives as a process towards achieving the vision. And finally, the framework for action emphasizes the importance of understanding and adapting the local governance to the local context. And what is done and when in a certain place has to take into account what is there already and what is feasible in the short and medium term, and the steps to be taken towards strengthening the groundwater governance need to be adapted to what is possible in time and space. The understanding of the context concerns the specific focus areas for action, especially identifying the main groundwater challenges of different dimensions. For instance, the physical and technical challenges to groundwater, allocation problems, conflicts around groundwater, inefficient use, and so on, failings in governance, weak regulations in other sectors affecting groundwater, and so on. And identifying the key facets of local context, First, the resource, the hydrological settings, the resource, groundwater, of course, the hydrological settings with characters of the aquifer systems or system that we are concerned in, interaction with surface water, recharge level, vulnerability to pollution, and so on. And the other facet is socioeconomy, human interaction with groundwater, importance of groundwater, exploitation level, risks and responses, and so on. And finally, the institutional setting, what are the political and economic conditions? Is groundwater governance effective or not? What policies are affecting groundwater, and so on. And in practice, the understanding the context can be done together with the first step of the FFA, the Framework for Action, by when conducting the diagnostic of groundwater governance. The first theme of the Framework for Action concerns the creation of a basis for governance. And to start with, we recall the key elements of good groundwater governance that we have just seen 2 slides earlier. Some of these elements reflect general conditions for good governance. They include political commitment and leadership, and knowledge and awareness, and stakeholder involvement. And these conditions are very essential for good groundwater governance. Now, to start to create the basis for governance, what we do is conduct groundwater governance diagnostic for the objective of taking a picture of the current local groundwater governance situation and its deficiencies, as well as its context, including challenges and opportunities for improvement on one hand, and to put in place the above general conditions for groundwater governance on the other hand. To go into more details of what is done for creating a basis for governance, is we said we take the initial diagnostic for groundwater governance, which aims at taking stock of the governance situation, of the governance provisions, actors, legal framework, policies and plans, and available knowledge, together with an assessment of gaps and opportunities. And we also take stock and assess the local context, that is the hydrogeology, the socioeconomy, the macro and political economy, as well as the specific groundwater governance challenges. And examples of the questions that are typical questions that are normally asked during the governance diagnostic are given in the next slide. Then the second point, we said the general conditions for groundwater governance, which consist of identifying and developing leadership in the case where it does not exist, organizing data collection, information generation, and knowledge sharing, undertaking awareness raising programs to increase awareness for groundwater, and so on, and facilitating stakeholder engagement to increase the chances of stakeholder engagement and participation. And all these activities, which aim at creating or setting the general conditions for groundwater governance, are also done during stakeholders consultations which take place right after the diagnostic, as we shall see. This is the list of sample questions to be asked during the initial groundwater governance diagnostic, and they are arranged by component of the groundwater governance: actors, legal framework, policies and plans, knowledge, information, and so on, in addition to the local context, which is also to be assessed as part of the initial groundwater governance diagnostic. The second theme of the framework for action is relates to building effective institutions. And it should be noted here that effective institutions in the framework for action incorporate legal and regulatory framework it was decided during the writing up of the framework for action during its development. The experts around the world that worked on the project and decided to lump the legal framework within the institutional framework. And one of the requirements of effective institutions is that responsive groundwater laws and regulations should be at par with the level of control over groundwater use and polluting activities. And to this end, typically laws and regulations would make 4 basic provisions. The first provision is that groundwater to be brought into the public domain in the case where it is not. The second provision relates to licensing of water well construction and groundwater extraction. The third provision relates to the control of point sources pollution of groundwater. And the fourth provision is that a requirement for transparency and sharing of data collected by all groundwater users, and private and public. The second requirement is that to facilitate adaptation to changing conditions, regulation needs to incorporate flexibility. For instance, as examples, groundwater abstraction and use right may not be granted in perpetuity, but rather subject to periodic adjustment in response to local or global changes, such as, let's say, weather shortage in the case of drought or what have you. Groundwater abstraction and use rights may be subject to forfeit without compensation if they are not used. Third example is that rights discovered to cause environmental damage may be terminated, and so on. Still within the theme of building effective institutions, there is a need for sound organizational design with adequate capacity for policy making and public administrations. This includes, for instance, institutions inclusive of stakeholders, because public agencies alone generally cannot manage groundwater. The institutional setups to integrate linkages and functions of groundwater management vertically between national and local level, and horizontally at each level with other sectors and agencies impacting on groundwater. And local level agencies, particular strengthening and motivation for frontline tasks of regulation and management. Local level agencies are the ones who that do the work, and they should be strengthened and given the necessary means and so on. There is also a need for mechanisms for permanent stakeholder engagement and participation. And to this end, there should be partnership between public agencies and private stakeholders for sustainable, equitable, and efficient groundwater management. Stakeholders' involvement recognition in law. For instance, the legal status of formally constituted groundwater associations should be recognized. The law mandating consultations with stakeholders or decisions and investment affecting groundwater resources. Public support to capacity building by groundwater management association or other institutional setup inclusive of all stakeholders, etc. Still, in the building of effective institutions, there is a need for procedures for cross-sector coordination and co-management to address issues of policies and practices of linked sectors. This include institutional mechanisms to coordinate policy and programs of other sectors which impact groundwater, for instance, use of subsurface space, land use management in general, and agricultural land use practices in particular, and institutional mechanisms to ensure harmonized interaction between groundwater and water-related issues. And finally, there is a need for institutions for the management of stakeholder transboundary groundwater, notably a cooperation agreement between jurisdictions in support of legal and institutional agreement, and collaboration between professionals, which is often the first step which lead ultimately to joint programs, to the establishment of joint programs and cooperation agreements. The third theme of the framework for action deals with making essential linkages, that is harmonizing governance of the sectors affecting groundwater with groundwater governance. And this includes identifying interdependencies and linkages between groundwater and other water resources on one hand, and between groundwater and other sectors on the other, and doing systematic identification of relevant interdependencies using structured methodologies and approaches. Then integrating the management of groundwater and surface water. And this can be done through the adoption of an integrated water resource management approach to manage both water supply and water demand conjunctively. Then linking groundwater management to sanitation and to waste and wastewater management, because proper management of wastewater and solid waste avoid threats to groundwater quality, especially at shallow depth. And linking groundwater management to the use, to the land use and land use practices. This because there are strong linkages between groundwater and land use. They are different for urban and rural areas, but the linkages need to be established for both rural and urban areas. Continuing with the establishment of essential linkages, there is a need to link groundwater management to the use of subsurface space and subsurface resources. This includes, for instance, the use of transport, the extraction of minerals and other solid matters, the storage of hydrocarbons and hazardous waste, the hydrocarbon development, geothermal energy development, and so on. Because all of these are significant users of groundwater, and at the same time they can bring pollution risks to groundwater. Then linking water and energy in groundwater management and governance, that is establishing a strong water energy nexus, as they are called, because energy pricing is an important tool for the sustainable groundwater management. It's the pricing of energy is a tool that the government have for leveraging or controlling the groundwater use. And also because water demand, there are water demands of the energy sector, and these demands need to be factored into groundwater policy and planning. And finally, there is a need for mainstreaming groundwater in other relevant policies and vice versa. So there is a need for harmonization of policies and regulations, management coordination between groundwater and these relevant policies. The fourth theme of the FFA deals with redirecting the finances. Which means aligning the incentive systems with sustainable use of groundwater. And by incentive systems, we mean the subsidies provided by the government. There is a need to address any distortions of these incentive systems. Distortions meaning that they are impacting negatively on groundwater. Another example for aligning the incentive systems is charging more for overuse of groundwater, for instance, paying more, making users pay for overuse of groundwater, or establishing incentives to encourage water conservation or higher water productivity, or groundwater recharge, etc. Another means of redirecting the finance, the need for the redirecting the finance is investing in effective governance. That is need for filling the gaps in groundwater governance that have been identified in the groundwater governance diagnostics and related to actors, institutions, policies, and knowledge, and so on. And also investing in groundwater management, for instance, protecting and improving groundwater recharge zones, developing well regulation systems, for instance, with electronic cards to be able to control the withdrawals, and tailoring investments in other sectors to promote recharge, for instance, transport or agricultural practices on land affect groundwater recharge. The fifth and last theme of the FFA deals with the establishment of a process for planning and management. This corresponds to the elaboration and implementation of management plans in priority aquifers to serve also for testing for the adequacy of the governance, the level of governance that is south as an objective before the test is done in priority aquifers, before going to other aquifers, before generalizing the governance south. We do the test in the very first ones. And this includes the identification and prioritization of aquifer systems, considering both the container, which is the aquifer, and the content, which is the groundwater resource. And the process of identification and prioritization includes the following steps. First, identification. This corresponds to the physical delineation of the systems, each aquifer system, and the socio-economic evaluation of the system, and the assessment of the pressure on the resource, on the groundwater of the system. Then prioritization of aquifer systems for levels of management according to objective criteria. This is treating each aquifer separately and having objective criteria, management criteria for that are adapted for each of them. And the plans and management are to be set at the lowest level to ensure stakeholder engagement, except for transboundary aquifers. Then the assessment of the status of the resource, that is the present resource status for each priority system, and its evaluation for the risk of degradation should be also done. And the management characterization of the system, that corresponds to the identification of the characteristics of the system, which will determine how it can best be managed during the improvement of the governance. Then the last two steps for establishing a process for planning and management. The first, which consists of drawing up management plans for the priority aquifers systems selected. And this includes carrying out consultation between the stakeholders, and the consultation process usually may be lengthy and time consuming, but it is absolutely necessary. The preparation of management plans and its adoption, of course, by the different stakeholders, and the adaptation of the plan also to local institutions, so that its implementation can occur smoothly, can run smoothly. And finally, implementing and reviewing the plans, which include implementation in the field. We'll see more details in what goes into and what is done during this step, and carrying out monitoring and reporting, and periodic evaluation and periodic reporting according to the dates that are fixed jointly by the different stakeholders. And this ends the presentation of submodule 3.2, which deals with the framework for action on groundwater governance. Thank you for your attention.